So the title, as you know, is Give to God what is God's, Caesar what is Caesar's, to the church what is church's, and to me what is mine. First of all, why I deal with that stuff, not just today for this conference, but also in general, just because I'm fascinated with that relationship between church and state. That doesn't mean at all that I understand the problem properly, so don't expect too much of me. I'm just fascinated. And I think that it's unavoidable. We cannot avoid the question, who is right in that sense, in the understanding of proper relationship between emperor and God, or state and church, and so forth. But you can also be on the right side without proper understanding of the problem. So I think that my knowledge about that is very poor. It's bigger than average student, but it's very poor in general. But I'm trying to be thought-provoking and to understand something, and I'm consoled with the words of big Jacques Maritain, who said that he researched about this problem for 25 years. So if he had to research about that problem for 25 years, it could take much more for me. I'm not sure about you. Another brief note is that we have heard a lot today from the historical and theological point of view. It seems to me that it's just a basic thing. I love philosophy because it seems to me that it always deals with the very basic things. It doesn't mean that it's easy to deal with basic things, but I like deal with very basic things. So the difference between history, philosophy, and inside philosophy, ethics, and then specifically political philosophy, from my point of view, is that history deals much more with facts, and philosophy deals also with facts. It takes in account also historical facts. It's impossible to philosophize without historical perspective, but it's also possible to philosophize without any historical fact. But philosophy deals much more with principles, not so much with facts, especially not historical facts. Inside the philosophy, ethics is a field in philosophy, or branch if you want. Maybe it's better to say field in philosophy, which deals with a question together with political philosophy, and I understand political philosophy as a branch of ethics, not independent tree. So political philosophy is a branch of ethics. They both deal with question what should be, not just what it is, what could be, but also what should be. It's not a question for history in a narrow sense. So facts and principles, we take both, but I'm much more interested in principles, not so much here. That's why I have esteemed colleagues from history department, from theology department, and other departments, because I'm much more interested in principles. Very basic, another basic things. It seems to me that it's proper to say that we as persons, as individuals and persons, and we as a humankind, willing or not, knowing that or not, we are searching for something like that: peace, freedom, safety, and we can call altogether, let's say, happiness. Peace, freedom, safety. So the part of that peace, freedom, safety is, of course, justice and some order. It seems to me that it's proper to say that peace is a consequence of some order. You can call that also justice, but order. I choose the word order. Peace is a consequence of some order. And what is order? that know already little children. Order is when all things are at proper place. So we are trying for centuries, even for millennia now, to put these things, God, Caesar, state, man, to proper place. And still, we are not much successful. It's my point of view. I think you agree. So, order is a consequence of peace is a consequence of order, and order is a consequence of the fact that things are in its proper place. Second thing, also basic and very, very simple, is that our life as individuals and as humankind is sort of a conquest of freedom. So we are not born free in that sense. We have to conquer the freedom. That doesn't mean that we are slaves, but for a little baby, we in that sense cannot say that she or he is free yet. She or he has to conquer his or her freedom. So I see, that's also historical perspective, I see the history as a sort of a very big human walk to conquer the freedom. For example, when we see the time of Christ, when he was on earth, when he said that famous sentence, give or render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's, in fact, that was the beginning of liberation of religion from the iron hug of empire or state or emperor, however you want. So, when we see the history of the church, we have many religious orders. It seems to me, I'm philosopher, not theologian, so I philosopher inside the Catholic Church, it's true, but I think as a philosopher, not as a theologian. It seems to me that we can say, and it's true, one of facts, that religious orders, among other things, are established because of searching for more freedom inside the church. And it seems to me that all history of the church, similarly as the history in general, is a conquest of freedom of every single person. So this is questions from my summary you have in your booklets. I will not read all of them, just few of them, just to remember. So what does the principle give to Caesars and so forth mean today? Who is Caesar, who is God? Who has the mandate to interpret this principle? Me, you, state, church, pope, who? What about the church in this context? I mean, usually I mean Catholic church, but you can take any other church if you want. Does the relationship between church and state imply equality? It's a very important question. Or does one side has primacy? So is it egalitarian or it's hierarchical vision of? Because it seemed to me that we have a lot of problems because of misunderstanding that question. Separation of powers, very simply. Are they like this or like that? In a sort of a scheme. Are God and the church one and the same? Is there anything that is not God's, that doesn't belong to God? Does giving to the church mean the same as giving to God? And what about me and my conscience in this whole story? What belongs to me, if anything? So these are my questions. If you expect direct answers, I have to disappoint you because I don't have direct answers. Maybe few of them, but maybe indirect answers. So I follow, just for present what I'm following, I follow this guy on the right side of the screen. It's Jacques Maritain. He follows St. Thomas Aquinas, of course, and both of them follow Aristotle. So that's the line which I am also following in my research. Distinguish to unite is a sort of a, I'm not sure is it proper word in English, sort of a maxima, sort of leitmotif of a whole Maritain's philosophy. So we have many of these sentences, and you can recognize immediately when you say something. For example, it's I love or like Plato, but I like more the truth. You immediately know it's Aristotle. And much more sentences. So if you want to recognize Maritain's philosophy, you have to know that distinguish to unite is his leitmotif of his whole philosophy. These two books primarily I recommend if you are not yet familiar with his philosophy. This on the right side is the elder one, Primacy of the Spiritual, or on the things that are not Caesar's. It is written in the 30s. I think that the first edition, it was precisely in 1930, after the problems with l'Action Française in France and papal condemnation of l'Action Française. It was the Pope Pius XI. And this, on the left side, is a very famous book of Jacques Maritain. One of the most popular books is Man and State. It's a much younger, it's from 50s. So these two books I recommend for those who are not familiar yet and for this topic. So on the line of that distinguish to unite, I propose a vision of history as a process of discernment. So we as persons, as individuals, and as a mankind, even as a church, throughout the history, we are discerning more and more. We are seeing more and more. So what we see today about this, that probably, principle yes, but in details, we see much more today as a church or as a humankind than 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. Similar like in individual life, we discern things. So discernment is very often enough. That's very nice and good news. So it's not entirely clear in this story what belongs to whom. So it's easy to say give to Caesar's or render to Caesar's what is Caesar's, but what precisely does that mean? So Christ didn't give that answer. What does it mean? That we have to deal with that question for our own, as individuals and as community. So it's not entirely clear, and it seems to me that it will not be clear for a long time in front of us. I don't know how much. First of all, it's a political statement in some sense. Of course, everything what comes out from Jesus' mouth, it's theological. It's eternal truth from a religious or perspective of faith. But it's also political sentence. It's very dangerous political sentence because in some sense, for example, for Jews, maybe it's not so much scandalous, but for Romans, it could be scandalous because that means that Caesar is not God. So it's first discernment. So because, as Professor just before me mentioned, we have very different images of God. So it can be, and they are often idols, not real God. Even a religious person can have such sense. And what about non-religious person? So Romans, they all had some sort of a picture of God. When Jesus said, give or render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's, that is distinguishing Caesar from God. But an important thing is a question. Maybe we don't realize that it's a very serious question. What is the relationship between God and Caesar? Maybe they are equal. Maybe God is below the Caesar. What Jesus wants to say. So we have to try to enter the shoes of Romans and Jews from the Christ's time. So it's pretty clear for us that when Jesus says that God is above Caesar. There is hierarchy. There is primacy of something. or somebody. There is no equality between God and Caesar. So you have to give what is God's to God, and Caesar's what is Caesar's. But there is primacy. There is hierarchy. It seems to me that it's not clear today when we talk about church and state. So hierarchy and primacy are very important concepts in this sense. Our vision, Christian, specifically Catholic vision, my vision is hierarchical vision of reality in total and especially in this sense. Hierarchy and primacy. Maritain also had that book I showed you. So the primacy of the spiritual. The primacy of the spiritual was the title. And then the subtitle, on the things that are not Caesar's. So this is a sort of a scheme for school children. God, church, state, persons. We could see, I'm not sure which scheme is proper. You could help me if you want. So God is above the church, church is above the state, state maybe is above the persons. But maybe the scheme is like that. We change the positions of state and persons because persons are created by God and state is not created by God. State is created by man. So if the state is creation, and even not creation of God, but creation of man, then maybe it's not proper to think that state is something above in that hierarchical vision of the reality, but something below the persons. And that comes the questions, what about the relationship between church and persons? So I'm repeating again, I'm not theologian. I respect doctrine of the Catholic Church. I'm a philosopher inside the Catholic Church, but my question is, maybe the proper hierarchical scheme is like this. It's for sure that men and the church, from the Christian perspective, are created by God. So church is not creation of man. But the state is clear. The state doesn't exist without man. So it's man creation. But persons and church are both created by God. What is much more important? What is more important? Church or persons? Maybe a stupid question, but still, it seems to me that it's very important to think about that. So I'm not sure, is this proper scheme of that hierarchy of this or this one? Are persons in better position in that hierarchy, in a higher position than the church, even though the church is also created by God, and we say that the church is a mystical body of Christ, who is Son of God, so he is God. Then comes the very important notion of conscience. Maritain wrote a lot of this stuff, so what about conscience? Because conscience could be in conflict either with state or emperor, but also with church authority. What about the freedom of conscience? It seems to me that it's very important to remember the slide about history as a process of discernment, because we as Christians, and specifically as Catholics inside the Catholic Church, we also, inside the church, learned a lot about the problems of conscience and freedom of conscience. That means that we didn't know enough 1,000 years ago, even we don't know enough today. So it's a question of discerning still. So if Jesus says, for example, Shabbat is for the sake of man, and Shabbat is also created by God in some sense. So it's God's creation. It's not established by man. It's established by God. It is for the sake of man. Could the same be said for the church? Church is for the sake of man. So man is much more important than Shabbat. Could we say the same thing for the relationship between man and the church? So when everything is in order, it means that everything is in its place. The consequence is peace. I just remembering what I said earlier. So it seems to me that all this process is for the sake of liberation of every man. So not just of Jews in that time, or after Jesus of church towards empire or emperor, or today, or in Middle Ages, whatever, towards state or kingdom, wherever. But liberation of every man. So it's a sort of a process of atomization, but it's a controversial notion, but individualization or personalization of that thing. So liberation of every man started maybe with a sentence, give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Liberation of every man. So it seems to me also this, that we are not aware enough of the freedoms we talk about. When we talk about the freedom is connected with economy, for example. I'm not an expert in economy, but I know that in economy, when you have, for example, that big difference between capitalism and socialism, you have that concept of zero-sum game. So the cake has a sort of the cake is like it is, so it's big so and so, and we have to give to everybody how much is possible. That is zero-sum game. There is no possibility to enlarge the cake. Capitalistic, for example, view in that sense is that the limitations of cake are not final. That wealth growth. That we can enlarge our wealth. And that's the main difference between capitalism and socialism. And in that sense, when we talk about the freedom, it seems to me that we often talk in the sense that it's zero-sum game. If you have more freedom, that means that I will have less. If church has more freedom, that could mean that state will have less freedom. But I'm not proposing capitalistic view, of course, as a solution of this problem, but it's inspiration for me to think about the freedom. So we can think about freedom as something what can be enlarged for everybody. I can have more freedom, and you can have more freedom, and church have more freedom, and academia can have more freedom, and media can have more freedom. Everybody can have more freedom. So, and it's a so-called connected vessels. When grows my freedom, that could mean that your freedom is also growing. And that, it seems to me, is often a source of a misunderstanding when we talk about the freedom of church or freedom of state or relationship between church and state. So it seems to me that conquest of freedom, I already mentioned, it seems to me that we today have more freedom than ever in every aspect of life. We can discuss 3 days about that, but it seems to me that it's true that we have more and more freedoms, but it's also true that the threat to our freedoms is bigger and bigger. So that's, I think that it's very much confusing. So the threat is always bigger and bigger. How much time I have still? Very little, okay. So in the end, everything, I'm concluding, everything in some sense belongs to God. So it seems to me that it could be one of precise answers to one of my questions. I said that I will not give direct answers, but it could be one of direct answers. Everything in some sense belongs to God. It's impossible, especially for a believer, to think about something that does not belong to God. But everything should be given or rendered to God in order He wanted. So that's, in my view, it's very important perspective. He wants that we understand properly the hierarchy of the creation, and that everything is rendered to Him in that order. When we don't understand properly that order, then we have disorder, and then we don't have peace. So everything should be given to God, but in the order He wanted. And to man, also one, we could say, direct answers. What belongs to me? What belongs to man? At least I can conclude one thing, at least. Freedom of conscience, of course, I mentioned that, but to man belongs the right to have them, church and state in our times, cooperate for his sake. So it seems to me that it's clear that church is above, as a spiritual realm, it's hierarchically above the state, but it's also for the sake of man. So to man belongs the right to have them, church and state, cooperate for his sake, for man's sake. And it seems to me that fine-tuning is a magic word in some sense, because nobody, in my view, knows precisely what does it mean. What does it mean? We know the principle, and we, through fine-tuning, are searching for the proper positions of that. But I propose hierarchical vision of God, person, church, and state, and to man belongs the right to have them, church and state, cooperate for the sake of man, and in that relationship, church is above the state. And this is the Croatian word for thank you.